I just want to thank Lincoln Roan. Lincoln is a force of nature, and he's really been doing a lot for deer hunters in Michigan, and you can see the emotion that drives him earlier tonight, and I just want to say thank you for your leadership. We've got a little light pollution going on here, but these are all deer from the Northwest 12. They're from the Let 'em Go, Let 'em Grow page, and these are all hunters that have had success up there. Quite a few of these hunters have changed their minds after they experienced APRs for a while. So it's one of the most thrilling things the last year really has been to see all these hunters coming up with these bucks and all the grins on their faces. But to start with, let's have an update on what's been going on in the Northwest 12. But I'm going to first point out that we started antler point restrictions in the lower peninsula in 2003 in Leelanau County, which is the county right at the little finger of Michigan. That was 3 points on a side. And before we started those antler restrictions, about 65% of the bucks in the harvest were yearlings. And after a few years, it dropped to 30%, and it stayed there for quite a few years now. 3.5 and older, before it was around 15% in the several years before antler point restrictions started, and that's over 40% now. And this is really put to the lie to the idea that these older deer are so much smarter than younger deer. They're not. They're just not there for most of us because they're there in such small percentages of the population. Hunters had to sacrifice in Leelanau County, and they have to sacrifice wherever we start these APRs. And what that is a drop-off in the first year. So these are the 2 years before APRs. That's hunter success, which is the percentage of hunters that got a buck. And it hovered around 21 or 23%, which is pretty common in the north part of our state where it can be difficult, where there aren't quite as many deer as there are down in the south. But it dropped off to only 15% the first year, but then it popped right back up. And every year since then, except for one, it's been above what the average was before the APRs were put in. So people are killing just as many bucks as they were before, except they're bigger and older in Leelanau County. Now part of that is because they lowered, I'm going to talk about this a little bit later, they lowered the antlerless quota there, and so the population rose during this period. One of the most astonishing things about Leelanau County is that when we look at the northern lower peninsula of Michigan, when the antler point restrictions started right here in 2003, there was a precipitous drop going on in hunter numbers. This is a chart of hunter numbers, and they were falling by 72,000 hunters from the span of 2001 to 2014. Massive number of hunters leaving the sport in that area. But in Leelanau County, they stayed stable for all those years. In fact, it was the only northern lower peninsula county that did not have a loss of hunters during that time. And we saw even better results in DMU 122. 2 years earlier than they started the antler restrictions in Leelanau County, they had antler restrictions in DMU 122 in the upper peninsula of Michigan. They had a rise in hunter numbers in the years after the antler point restrictions were put in. This just shows you a chart of yearlings over time. The 2 years before, it was around 65%, the 3 years before, and then it dropped off, and it hovers now around 30% yearling harvest. And the 3.5 and older rose from around 10 or 15% to around 40% currently. You don't need a lot of skill to kill 3.5 and older bucks if they're there to shoot. If you never see one in a lifetime of hunting, of course you can't shoot one. This is Clay McNett. He's here in the room. He hunted up there in Leelanau County. His family owns over 300 acres of land in a nearby county that is not under APRs. He chose, once the APRs were in place, to go up there. And a few years ago, I wrote this article called The Best Deer Hunting County in Michigan, which is Leelanau County. And I featured him in it because he had killed the 5 biggest bucks of 30 years of hunting in Leelanau County, on sandy soils, in one of the biggest snow belts in northern Michigan, on public ground. And now, what have you got now, Clay? 10 of them? Clay's over here somewhere, I think. Oh, Clay? How many you got now? How many from Devon Drive?
Again.
How many from the National Seashore? National Park. And he's killing big bucks there. The buck harvest went down for only 1 year. Hunter numbers and hunter success remained steady. And 72% of the hunters that were surveyed after 5 years were in favor of continuing those antler restrictions, so they still continue today. It's an awesome result. So the DNR decided to expand that antler restriction into 12 counties, 3 points on a side. In 2013, it was supported in a survey by 68% of the hunters in that region. We have a survey in the mail that is going to be processed soon, and we'll find out how happy they are after 4 years of hunting. This is what happened there. The 1.5-year-olds dropped off from around 65%. This happened a lot faster in the 12 counties than it did in Leelanau County, and now hovers around 20% of the harvest being yearlings, and 3.5 and older went from 15% to over 40%. Awesome results. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. I'm just going to mention Jim Sweeney, concerned sportsman of Michigan, who recently put out a white paper questioning this data. He rightly pointed out that the data were biased by collection of samples at big buck nights. The DNR asked some of our QDMA groups if they would contribute bucks because they can't get very many big bucks in a lot of places. So they get them from the aging night. And it turns out that that biases the data. He put out that paper, but what he didn't mention is that it was such a small fraction of the total sample that it had no impact on the results. And here it is. I worked this data up. The blue is with the aging night data, and the red is without it. 1.5, 2.5, and 3.5-year-olds in the Northwest 12. It makes no difference. So if anybody brings that up to you, let them know that, yeah, it was true that it biased the data, but it didn't make a difference in the outcome. This is part of an endless crusade, and I'm calling upon all of you in this room because you're leadership in this state. It's an endless crusade they're doing to try to discredit the results by only telling part of the story. Hunter numbers have been stable. We hope that antler point restrictions will help hunter retention and hunter recruitment, but it takes a few years for that to happen. But for right now, if you look at the northeastern lower peninsula, hunter numbers have fallen by about 603 per year, and they've fallen less in the Northwest 12. That doesn't mean anything, it's not statistically significant, but at least hunter numbers are not falling. And one of the other scare stories that have been told is hunters are going to quit because they'll be too frustrated. Well, they're not. And by the way, that's after a long decline. In both of those areas, hunters have been declining for a long time. Hunter success rate went down the first year as expected. This is the Northwest 12, this is the Northeast Lower Peninsula as a control. And these are slope lines, and you can see that there's a slight decline. It dropped off, and now it's rising up the last 2 years. Next month we'll have the 2016 data, so we'll see if it's picking up further. So there is a little cost associated with it right now in this first 2 years. But that happened in Leelanau County too. It went down for a couple of years. Hunter success on antlerless has gone up in both regions. And therefore, hunter success for both sexes has been great in the Northwest 12, just as it has been in the Northeast Lower Peninsula. So people are taking home just as much venison as they did before. Actually, they're taking home more. Yearling harvest is down. Harvest of older bucks is up. Hunter success rate on bucks is down slightly. Hunter success rate on deer is up slightly. Hunters are harvesting the same number of deer, but the bucks are bigger and older. And I'm just going to quote Lyle Hankins, who's a guy who was totally against APRs until they came in. He's a meat processor up there. Now he's in love with them. He was part of an article I wrote a few weeks ago for Michigan Outdoors magazine. And in there I quote him saying he's a meat processor. They used to bring me bone meat in a little milk crate. Now they need bigger containers. Same number of deer, lots more meat. So don't listen to complaints from meat hunters. It just ain't so. We're going to have this survey coming out in the next few weeks that will tell us what hunter satisfaction is like. Now I'm going to switch over and talk about mandatory antler point restrictions in disease zones. And you hear a lot about this, and I hear a lot of people and see a lot of mention on social media.